Hello everybody and welcome to today's webinar with CYCJ. I'm Charlotte Morris and I'm delighted to introduce you to Dr Sean Creaney and Dr Samantha Burns, who are going to be delivering our webinar today. They'll be explaining and discussing the barriers and facilitators to child first participation in co-production and youth justice. Dr Sean Creaney is a senior lecturer in psychosocial analysis of offending behaviour at Edgehill University. He's also a founder advisory board member of the social justice charity Peer Power. And Dr Samantha Burns is a lecturer in criminology at Durham University, who has particular interests in youth justice and rights-based participatory approaches. She's currently Deputy Chair for the National Association of Youth Justice and also an advisory board member at Peer Power. So very well qualified to talk us through participation today. So without any further delay, I'm going to hand over to Sean and Samantha. There will be questions at the end and opportunity for discussion. As always, please put your questions in a chat box and we'll try to make sure that we can answer as many as possible. Thank you very much and enjoy.
Thank you, Charlotte. It's so lovely to introduce us. I'm just going to try and share my screen now. Okay, I hope that everybody can see that all right. So welcome to our presentation on child first participation and co-production in youth justice. So quickly, just to kind of reiterate a little bit of an introduction about ourselves, but more really to kind of welcome you all in kind of sharing why we're here today, because I feel like it's really important to kind of let you know that both Sean and I have had years of lived experience, both as a young person and as a professional working in different parts of the justice system. And from these experiences, it's kind of led us both onto this journey where we've decided that we want to kind of explore some of the challenges and issues around children not being able to have a voice or participate in decision-making processes. So this is like a huge passion that we've kind of built over the years, and we've been fortunate enough to both study our PhDs on it. And so, yeah, we're just really grateful to be here today and to be able to talk with you for the next 40 minutes or so about some of the things that we've uncovered. And so the webinar really is split into 3 sections. And so first of all, we're going to explain and explore this child first participation principle and kind of talk about how it's become recognised in practice now. And the second part will kind of draw upon some of the barriers and challenges that we've uncovered through different bits of research. And then the end of this webinar is just kind of showing how there's some progressive participatory practices that have come about, and we'll particularly draw you upon one example that we think is quite a good solution to moving forward and yeah, kind of transforming the way that we work with children in the justice system. So I'm going to now pass you over to Sean, who's going to introduce Child First and the kind of participatory aspect of that.
Excellent, thank you, Sam. Welcome everybody. Thank you to CYCJ as well for this opportunity here to discuss child first participation and co-production. Now, we think this is quite a good place to start really in terms of talking about those aspects of practice. So just to give a little bit of context, there's an argument that child-led practice, which includes children's participation and co-creating practice with children, has not really been a fundamental feature of recent youth justice policy in England. So in 2016, when the Youth Justice Board published its participation strategy, that was welcomed because it set out really to reverse this neglect, and there was a real focus on infusing a change in culture and giving credence to the voice of the child. So that particular participation strategy referred to children as having a right to a voice. So in particular, Articles 12 and 13 of the UNCRC, but also a commitment to acknowledge that children are also able to and should have the freedom to impart ideas and be listened to. So there was discussion within the document concerning the importance of children's substantive involvement in the design and delivery of services. So the commitment was there from the YJB, and there was also some discussion, and this is something that we will come on to partway through the presentation, about the barriers that may impede children's meaningful participation. So whether that's communication difficulties or children not feeling confident or comfortable being able to actively enact agency. That was something that was uncovered as part of my PhD research as well, and decide a particular course of action. So the YJB pledged to seek and value children's feedback on their experiences throughout all stages of the system. And it set out several core principles which were intended to undergird decision making and nurture this participatory culture, something that Peer Power and the YJB and Clearview Research have recently emphasised as well within our recent report on participation and co-production. So this included an emphasis on promoting children's ability to exercise agency and choice, and as I've said, a concerted effort to assign dedicated participation champions, or what we call at Peer Power participation influencers, to develop this inclusive practice with children and enable them to exert influence and shape decision making, and consequently enhance provision. So this particular strategy is worth reading if you've not already read it. Now, this commitment from the YJB has been further reflected in the Child First approach, and in particular that this is noticeable in their definition. But just before we come on to that, I think it's important, as you can see on the slide there, to emphasise how crucial it is to put children's voices first. So as we've said, there's a quote here from Smithson et al, and it's a fundamental right for children to be provided with opportunities to determine the response to problems associated with their behaviour. And this was reflected in the publication by Charlie Taylor as well in 2016. So it's a fundamental right for children to be provided with opportunities to play a part in determining the response to the problems associated with their behaviour, and likewise children have the right to a voice and to be provided with opportunities to influence systems and processes that affect them. And again, it was welcome that Charlie Taylor reiterated this in the review in 2016, which also asserted that children under supervision need to be viewed and responded to at all times as children first. Charlie Taylor led the review of the youth justice system, and it was for the Ministry of Justice. Interestingly, in relation to children's participation and the voice of the child, this is something that we are going to come on to, but just to reiterate that the work of Peer Power has shown that when meaningfully engaged over a substantial period of time, and when offered that well-being, relational and resilience support, children and young people can be experts by experience. This is something we're going to come on to. And young people who have lived experiences of contact with the system and who are remunerated for their participation can provide unique insights, share knowledge and experience of justice and health services, and contribute to that full cycle of delivering services, including design, commissioning and evaluation. So in terms of Child First and the particular principles then, so in terms of the YJB definition of Child First, So the Youth Justice Board's Child First definition comprises a focus on observing commitments towards the best interest of the child. So Article 3, for example, of the UNCRC, and the application of a positive youth justice. So Kevin Haynes and Stephen Case, their model of positive youth justice, and in particular the concept of child-friendly practice, for example, which includes meaningful opportunities for children to impart ideas in both the policy realm and at the point of service delivery. It's worth noting at this point as well that Anne Browning and Stephen Case have both published two very, very good documents discussing the evidence-based child first approach, so it's worth reading those pieces of work, and there's references at the end of the PowerPoint as well. So to avoid situations whereby there is a disproportionate emphasis on the child divorced from environmental influences, there's a strong focus on assessing the impact of external influences on behaviours, so the structural context, which is really good within this definition. Because that can limit children's ability to shape decision-making processes, the context, the external influences, and also included in the YJB Child First definition is a promotion of positive behaviours and outcomes and strengths-based practices. So here there's an acute focus on identifying and maximising positive aspects of children's lives through working with them, tapping into and building on their particular skill sets in a pro-social way. So this is an evidence-based model and approach to help address structural inequalities that I alluded to, and to promote pathways to desistance. The development of a constructive child practitioner relationship is viewed as a medium for change and a core component of effective practice. So as we say at Peer Power, the relationship is the intervention, and this is reflected in this YJB definition. So facilitating participatory practices is clearly of the utmost importance to the YJB, and this is reflected in their commitment to recognise children's ability to offer unique insights, which is something we'll talk about a bit later as well. And pivotal to this is the acknowledgement that children are partners in the process. They're not disinterested objects, they're partners in the process. Children have the right and the ability to co-construct knowledge throughout assessment processes and intervention planning. And finally, as you can see on the PowerPoint there, the YJB strategy seeks to promote a non-criminal identity by maximising routes to diversion, to avoid or discourage early or escalating criminalisation. So throughout this process, there's a spotlight on positive alternatives and the identification of underlying unmet needs thought to be driving behaviours and influencing outcomes, especially in relation to education, health and social care.
Cool, thanks, Sean. So I just want to reiterate kind of some of the things that Sean's just been speaking about, and it's really kind of getting us to all focus in on the definition of child first participation, and what the YJB have described it as is encouraging children's active participation, engagement and wider social inclusion, explaining that all work is a meaningful collaboration with children. And so it's really kind of, focusing on children being these really active contributors, rather than, just being passive recipients of welfare or justice, and kind of ensuring that participation isn't just tokenistic, it's, it's really impactful, and it's contributing to outcomes not only for the child's well-being but also for the wider service provision as well. But I really kind of brought this, or kind of wanted to highlight this definition for us all to have a bit of a kind of critical reflection on it, really, because of course, all definitions can be picked at, unpicked a little bit. And so the next slide that I've got for you all is just for us to think about how can that definition be promoted within practice. So some of the questions here that I've got just to kind of guide your thinking for a moment is, what does engagement and collaboration mean to you, especially if you are a practitioner within youth justice service? How does that how does that definition relate to how you engage with children in the work that you do? And how can we make sure that children's participation is meaningful? Because there's an abundance of theory and literature that talks about how participation can be tokenistic if it's not done properly. So what are the things that we can do to ensure it's meaningful? And finally, which is something that we're going to come on to in a minute, is what barriers and challenges might there be? You might be thinking about things that are problematic within your daily work life when you're engaging with children. And so what kind of things are coming up for you? They might be a little bit different to the things that we've uncovered. But yeah, I'm going to pass you back to Sean, because he's going to go into some detail of some of the things that we've found to be some of the major challenges to ensuring that children can participate meaningfully in the justice system.
Excellent, thank you, Sam. So in terms of some of the barriers, some of the challenges then, so clearly a key obstacle to promoting a pro-social self has been professionals who exert a powerful influence over young people, having some reservations about handing over control. Professionals can aim to overcome this, though, by being transparent about their roles and responsibilities, and commit towards creating a collaborative relationship characterised by trust and empathy, ensuring that it is clearly and routinely communicated to the child that their viewpoint is of value. Children may perceive their treatment by professionals as illegitimate. That could be a challenge or a barrier. So if they are not provided with the opportunity to inform the process, any aspect of the process, and influence decisions that affect them. So conversely, though, this is a potential solution here. When children perceive their treatment by the youth justice system as legitimate, according to Haynes and Case, so they see it as fair, as just, as moral, then they're more likely to both comply and engage with interventions. So it's important, clearly, to put children's voice first through a collaborative relationship with professionals, where it's possible to co-create the way services are received by the child, which is why it's important to focus on professionals and the way that they facilitate forms of participation with children. Another particular challenge, so from a child's perspective, they may be the fear that professionals are given carte blanche to decide a course of action, considered necessary to secure compliance with an adult-led agenda. So to potentially overcome this real or perceived concern, one practitioner or another type of professional could strive towards making sure that the process that this is negotiated and a compromise takes place, whereby children have opportunities to exercise agency and choice, with a view to an agreement being reached whereby both stakeholders meet in the middle. Now, there are further challenges, and there are some listed here on the PowerPoint slides, like, for example, lack of funding, lack of resources as well. So organisations might not have the funds to create a participation influencer role or a dedicated participation champion role. There could be confusing, contradictory understandings of participation as well, in terms of exactly what that concept means. Participation may be contingent on behaviour or risk. So an example is children that are considered by the organisation to be high risk might not have the same opportunities as those children who are considered by organisations to be low or medium risk. Whilst it's worth noting, the YJB in England and Wales has moved away from risk. However, at a practice level, risk is still a concept that some practitioners use, and judgments are still made based on risk. And also another challenge is the inspection framework as well. This is something Sam and I have talked quite a bit about. Now, on the one hand, with regard to the criteria, the inspection criteria or the inspection framework, They do focus on important things related to public protection, but on the other hand, there clearly is some work to be done, and HMIP, for example, could look at including a much greater focus on quality participation work, inspecting quality participation work, and involving children and young people much more in inspections as well. So, for example, incorporating the child first definition within inspection frameworks, because clearly an issue, and this was highlighted by Anne Browning and Stephen Case recently in their publication, for some practitioners the main focus is on managing cases effectively to satisfy the inspectorate. So their focus isn't necessarily on promoting children's participation and co-creation. The focus seems to be more on making sure that they survive the inspectorate when they come in. So that there's clearly more work to be done there. And Sam and I were also talking because HMIP have promoted some resources for practitioners, so that was really welcomed. There's a good publication on children's meaningful participation. So clearly there's interest there and there's commitment from HMIP, but we think that there's more work to be done there. Now, the case management guidance is being updated currently. This was something that Tim Bateman spoke about recently at the NAYJ seminar. So when that's been updated and published, case management guidance, perhaps HMIP will either overhaul or revisit their inspection criteria in response to the evidence base, etc. And another challenge is power imbalances between practitioner and the child as well. So clearly, the practitioner, for example, can instigate breach proceedings or can refer the child to a non-compliance meeting, for example. So clearly there are some challenges there. There's a power imbalance, so it's thinking about how to overcome that particular challenge, and risk-based environments as well. If a child is seen as risky, then that can be a real barrier to developing a trusting relationship if the practitioner views them as risky. So those are just some of the potential barriers, some of the potential challenges, but we welcome obviously discussion on this as well from yourselves.
Yeah, definitely. Hope that there's some kind of additions to some of the barriers and challenges that might be faced in practice. But I'm just going to draw our attention now to kind of the theory and practice of co-production and co-creation, because I feel like this is where, if we utilise these concepts of co-production and co-creation, it kind of really helps us to understand or kind of detach ourselves from more kind of tokenistic participatory practices where there might just be a consultation that happens, or a child just might get asked like, oh, what do you think? And is that really enough to give children the space and opportunities to share their expertise and knowledge, because we recognise that children do have their own lived experience that they can contribute and help to shape how services are delivered and planned. And I guess that all of these kind of parts of co-production and co-creation that we've got on the screen here are all kind of like interrelated in some way. But I think what we kind of envisage is that all of these parts are based around reflecting on how the role of professionals should change. So it's about allowing us to reflect back and think, how are we creating those relationships? I know Sean mentioned right at the beginning that the relationship is the intervention, and so having that relationship based approach is so important. But when we think through a co-production lens, we can make sure we incorporate those trusting, equal and reciprocal partnerships. So like, what do you give to the child, but also what does the child give back to you, and how can you have that mutuality and reciprocity within those partnerships? And the word partnership, we feel, is really important because it does echo this kind of non-hierarchical relationship where there is equal power shared, and we know that some practices within the youth justice services, decisions made might be non-negotiable, but and there'll always be these issues with power. And I know that Hannah Smithson and her team have wrote recently about those power dynamics and the issues around that. But there are solutions and there are ways out of it. And we believe, and they've wrote about how co-production and co-creation are solutions to that. But one of the things that we really picked up on about co-production, co-creation is its ability to bring the practitioner role into a co-constructor of knowledge with children, and we think that's really integral to think about that. The knowledge and the expertise that children bring can be given a greater value and a greater weight on that. But also that children's participation, it's not just on an individual level. We really want to be thinking about how can children be involved in the transformation of services at a more strategic level, and I think that's where a lot of things have been, or where children have been missing from those spaces. We're bringing in child first participation now, and we're thinking about a cultural shift. So wouldn't it be great if children had that opportunity to be part of that cultural shift and help to transform the way that justice services are delivered to them? And so from this kind of thinking about barriers and thinking about potential solutions, we kind of really want to kind of broaden out and think about some opportunities for progressing these participatory practices, and thinking about what is co-production like in practice and how can we extend on that. And so we've talked a little bit about this already, but this report is something that both Sean and I were involved in, and actually we probably could have spent like a whole 40 minutes just talking about this one report because it's really fascinating. But one of the major strengths of it was that it was co-produced with young partners from Peer Power, and they were so integral in leading this, and so grateful to have that opportunity with them. But the main kind of tenets of this report was exploring service provision across England and Wales. And so we managed to reach out to different youth justice services and get their understandings of what they kind of thought participation was like at this current time within their practice. And there was a huge mixed results from that. And we were able to then tap into a few services and have a look a little bit deeper at what some of those issues were. And I think a lot of it came from, again, the barriers and challenges that Sean previously mentioned. They kind of keep arising up, and these problems are there. And so from those kind of issues that were raised within those sessions with some youth justice services, there was an opportunity for us to kind of analyse some of that data, have discussions with the young partners, and together we've brought out some recommendations for progressing practice. And what's really great about this report as well is that it structures it in a way that there's like 3 stages of how you can kind of progress co-creation and participation within practice. And they talk about doing quick wins first and then thinking about more kind of cultural structural shifts later on. So I don't want to talk too much about it other than the fact that Peer Power really emphasised this meaning of participation and co-creation and co-production, not being this kind of thing where co-creation is like this thing at the top that everybody needs to work towards, but rather they talk about it as this being this kind of like non-hierarchical continuum that's like fluid and dynamic, and it'll kind of be changing and responding depending on the context. And we know that there's all these different spaces where we work with children, and sometimes co-production isn't applicable, and we understand that, and that's okay. But of course it's just about understanding how you can progress those kind of ideas into certain contexts, and that's what we're kind of trying to do. And so just kind of wanting to show you again what was created from that report, because not only was that report made, but there was an abundance of resources actually created, such as like a participation charter and a kind of pick a mix thing showing all the different types of participation, so that you can kind of look at the different definitions of them and how they are different and how you can then use that in practice. And I have put a link on there as well, which you'll be able to access, I think, after, if you get the recording. But this is an amazing video that was created by the partners, just kind of identifying how they want relationships to be shifted and to, you know, create these co-produced partnerships.
Number 1, rights and readiness. I'm only asking halfway. I'm not asking you to take it all away. Do you care about resilience? When I walk halfway down your stair, you can't even meet me there. Setting the standard for brilliance, and you can't even meet me there. Children and practitioners need to know their rights and fully understand them so they can meet each other in the middle.
Okay, so yeah, that was just emphasising the issues of those kind of hierarchical relationships and how we're wanting to kind of bring practitioners and children together to create these, you know, equal and reciprocal partnerships that are, you know, emphasised through kind of an empathic relationship. And yeah, I hope that that's one of the elements that you've kind of taken from how we've tried to explore what co-production is like in practice. And so one really great example that we think is good to talk about in this space is peer mentoring. And it's something that was discussed with some organisations through our work with Peer Power. And I know that Sean is a real expert on this. And so I'm going to pass it on to him so he can explain in more detail about peer mentoring and kind of what it is and how it can be a solution to progressing ideas of participation in the justice system.
Excellent, thank you, Sam. And just to say as well, thank you to Anne-Marie Douglas, who's the founder and CEO of Peer Power, for including us in that amazing project that Sam's just talked about. So it was commissioned by the Youth Justice Board for England and Wales. Clearview Research were involved as well in the project, but it was led by social justice charity Peer Power. So in terms of peer mentoring, this was a theme that emerged as well as part of that project with Peer Power. So within that project, there was a focus on strengths-based practices. That was one of the chapters, and children's participation rights, and then co-creation, co-production. The benefits of trusting, constructive child practitioner relationships can be supplemented by peer mentoring. So there are different definitions. To an extent, it's a contested concept, but there are some key features. So arguably, it involves those with lived experiences of system contact, providing advice and support to their peers, experiencing issues or challenges, etc., that they can relate to. So peer mentors can be authentic and a credible voice, an inspiration to others that change is possible, and support their peers to influence the decision-making process. So this type of approach places value on expertise born of experience, so drawing on the work of Lister there, by treating children not as passive objects who are done to, so for example through non-consultative arrangements, but as co-producers whose insights are of critical importance to how organisations operate and how professionals care for and respond to them. So we are advocating the approach of peer mentoring, but within a child first framework and emphasising co-creation, co-production. So peer mentoring can be described as a participatory and strengths-based practice if it's within that framework of child first. And it can be used to reconcile potentially any lack of engagement or perceived lack of engagement, or if children feel disempowered, then this could be an approach that helps and that is helpful and supportive. So children who have experienced challenges, and that could be adversity, or if they've then forged a positive path for themselves despite obstacles and unfortunate circumstances, we argue that they can accrue experiential knowledge. So just with regard to what Sam was talking about then, about, you know, professional knowledge and expertise clearly is of value, but so too is children's knowledge and expertise. So this model, this approach potentially could be quite progressive. So children as peer mentors arguably can be experts by experience, capable of providing those unique insights. So we can incorporate a rights-based approach here as well as part of this model, sharing knowledge and experiences of using justice services. And this experiential knowledge can be defined as know-how in terms of how potentially to navigate life's challenges and system demands. And peer mentoring can also be a valuable tool of enhancing co-production within yachts, within youth offending services or youth justice services within England and Wales, because it values children's resources and can bring them into more, as what Sam was alluding to, their equal relationships, both with youth offending team staff and others. So peer mentors can be vital influencers, able to relate to mentees, similar circumstances or situations, and forge those meaningful connections with those experiencing a comparable phenomenon. They can inspire their peers and assist them in the change process, demonstrating to them that it's possible to overcome problems and live a meaningful and productive life. They can be an empowering role model who influences attitudes and behaviours in a positive way. So that's just a brief overview of that particular approach, that particular type of practice. And of course, with regard to peer mentoring, there are some particular challenges with regard to this particular approach. So clearly, with regard to power dynamics in mentoring relationships, that can be an issue or a challenge, difficult to overcome or reconcile. But if there are systems in place and processes in place, for example, then that can potentially be overcome in terms of issues with regard to power dynamics in mentoring relationships. If it's within a co-creation, co-production and child first model, then these issues, these challenges can potentially be overcome with regard to power dynamics. There's some literature and research highlighting some of these challenges. So for some children, then they might not feel able to receive support from a peer mentor, or might not feel that it's beneficial for them being involved in this sort of relationship, or the mentor, the person that's supporting the mentee, for whatever reason might not be able to relate and to connect. But I think that some of these challenges can be reconciled by organisations who use this co-production model, as I've referred to there, as they invite new peer mentors to become experts through training programmes which discuss how to talk to other children about their lived experience, and encouraging other children to not engage in problematic behaviours, while also ensuring that there's sufficient knowledge base around children's participation rights as well. So there are some of these challenges can be overcome. And there are some other challenges as well in relation to risk assessment and risk management. Now, the YJB, as we've said, have moved away from risk-focused practices. However, in practice, there still is a focus on risk. So some practitioners might be unsure about either setting up apprenticeships or peer mentoring projects. There might be challenges there because they might be worried or concerned that some of the children might become involved in these projects and then they might go on to hurt or harm other people. That there might be that fear there as well. That can be a particularly difficult challenge. But as we've said, some of the issues can be reconciled by organisations who adopt a co-production model and a participation culture and invite new peer mentors to become experts through training programmes. And this is a key one here, as we've alluded to, about how to talk to other children about their lived experiences. Yeah,
I guess it's just kind of reiterating that children, are experts through their experience, and it's important to not only value them but recognise the work that they're doing as well. So I think we've talked about peer mentoring having incentives and people getting kind of valued for the work that they do. So is it a voluntary role, or are peer mentors kind of seen as this role that's kind of included within the workforce and within the organisation? And I think that's what we kind of mean about a participation culture, and kind of seeing co-production not just on a relationship base but within a community aspect as well. So it's how you bring in and include in children into that service, so they're not just a child that just comes in, signs off their assessment and then leaves again, but you're actually bringing their strengths into that organisation and allowing them to feel this sense of belonging, which is also a really important aspect of desisting from offending behaviour as well. So yeah, I think that Sean's talked so excellently about peer mentoring, but we do really kind of see this as one example of how we can use this child first model and apply it into this idea of what it means to mentor and support children that do require our support. So I think we've kind of got to the end of this webinar now, and these are just some overarching reflections that we've kind of thought about in terms of thinking about how to engage in relationship-based and non-hierarchical relationships, and also making sure that we do view children as capable and active co-producers, making sure that they are having a voice, but they also are not just involved on an individual level, but thinking about how can we change the way that we set it up so that children are engaged in changing, designing, delivering and changing services and how they're received by them. I think that engaging particularly with power is something that's just a never-ending battle within the youth justice service. It's probably something that's just going to keep raising up. But yeah, we just hope that that this kind of child first participatory approach and these ideas of co-production and co-creation are a way of us to face power head on and to try and shift that so that children do feel equal, do feel valued, and do feel like we are there to provide them with as much support as they need. Sean, do you want to come in with anything else in terms of trying to kind of conclude this part of the webinar?
Oh, excellent summary, Sam. I think as well, just to note, with regard to peer mentoring, for some children, not all children, but for some children, becoming a peer mentor or peer navigator can be an opportunity for them to improve, whether it's their communicative skills or interpersonal skills. It can also potentially provide future employment opportunities as well. Now, it's essential that they are provided, though, with appropriate guidance and able to access training and support. So clearly that's a key challenge with regard to peer mentoring projects. And we're really interested in hearing from people on this call who have already set up peer mentoring projects in terms of your reflections on what some of the benefits are, what some of the issues are, what some of the challenges are. And also as well, alongside this, professionals, it seems, according to the research and evidence, professionals should set up a thorough screening selection process and reflect carefully and critically on the process of mentor-mentee matching. But in terms of concluding this seminar, I think Samantha's done an excellent job there. Right at the beginning, we talked about the child first approach in England and Wales and the Youth Justice Board's definition. And then we focused in particular on collaborative relationships. That's one important aspect of the definition, and looked at children's participation and co-creation, co-production. Then we've reflected on some of the barriers, some of the challenges. There are more. These are some that are informed by the evidence that we've highlighted, some of the barriers, some of the particular challenges. And then finally, we talked about one aspect of practice, progressive form of practice, and we've reflected on child first peer mentoring as a potential approach that's progressive and can be empowering, can be transformative as well. But crucially, children have to be viewed and treated as partners in that process for it to be effective, for it to work. So yeah, thanks Samantha.
Cool. I'm just going to stop sharing my screen now, and hopefully loads of people have got questions and things to share.
Can you hear me, Holly? Thank you very much. Thank you so much, Sean and Samantha. What a fantastic webinar. It really feeds into what we're trying to do here at CYCJ with participation, and I think there's a lot to take back to that. And I think it's always so good to hear what's happening from an English perspective as well. So thank you. I hope everybody else found that as inspiring as certainly I did. Now I think we have some questions, so let me just check. And I will just ask the questions to you, if that's okay. And we'll get some answers. And if you don't get your question answered today, Sean and Samantha are happy to answer them by email. Okay, let me just find what I can see. Sorry, it's just loading up. Okay, so first question. Without endorsing the use of custody with children, in brackets, I don't, I think it is not something which is going away soon, but it presents unique issues regarding anything resembling being child-led. The creation of a new style of custody, in brackets, secure school, does present an opportunity for children to be involved in its very design as a custodial estate. Is there any evidence that children have in fact been involved in this? I don't know who wants to take that, or I can repeat it if you like.
Yeah, I can see the question on the screen actually. Yeah, that's a really interesting question, isn't it? Because yeah, there is an amazing opportunity for children to be involved in the design of that. But I haven't seen any evidence that they've been involved in it. I don't know if you have, Sean.
I haven't, to be honest. No, I've not. It's a really good question that Kathy's asked there. I think on the one hand, just at the opening part of the question there, without endorsing the use of custody, and I know Kathy does not endorse the use of custody, and I think that with the YJB definition, the point number 4 there about diverting children away from the system as much as possible, that's absolutely crucial, and that custody should only ever be used as a last resort for the shortest possible time. And we need to make sure that that message is strong and clear, because that is evidence-based in terms of that message that custody does not work. It's not a place that children should go to. However, as you've asked with the question, which is really important, some children are sent to prison, young offender institutions, for example, and it's really important that when they are there for the shortest possible time as a last resort, that the approach is child first and child friendly, and that they are involved as much as possible in the care that they're receiving, in the interventions, etc. I've made a note of that, and I'm going to do some research to find out the answer to that, because that's a really important question there, that in terms of how involved children are currently in that process. I do remember the work, the You Are Boss project that the Howard League did a few years ago. I'm going to revisit that work because I know that was really important. That was collaborative work that was done with children within prison. I think Ross Little was involved as well in that work. I'm going to revisit that and research that question, yeah, about whether we know if children have been involved in in that process, the creation of a new style of custody.
Okay, thank you for that. I'll just try and move up to the next one. Although the current emphasis of the YJB on participation is welcome, do you feel that the current government's lack of prioritisation of the rights of children in conflict with the law across many areas undermines this work?
I don't know whether to just give a short answer or a long answer for this one. Oh yeah, it's so paradoxical, really, isn't it? And you know, this participation agenda is obviously welcomed, but yeah, structurally there's so many issues going on. You know, using custody as an example of you know, reports that come out of children you know, being treated in almost abusive ways, it kind of does make us kind of sit really uncomfortably with how we are bringing this idea of participation into practice, and how it is having this child first lens. And I think that's where Sean and I have tried to discuss the barriers and challenges of this, but we've only kind of spoke about it at a practice level and not really kind of thought about it from a you know, central government perspective as well. But that's definitely having an influence for sure. Yeah, I just don't really have a solution to that right now. What about you, Sean? What do you think?
Yeah, just building on the important points you've highlighted there, Sam. I think that the YJB child first approach it's excellent that we are focusing on diverting children away from the system, and those that are diverted away, signposting them to health, educative, social care support. So they're still getting the support. It's not within the criminal justice system. They're not acquiring those criminal records, etc. So they're diverted away. I think it's really good that we've moved towards strengths-based practices. However, yes, government's lack of prioritisation of the rights of children. I think one example is a new bill that's going through a whole host of issues, but in particular, it could result in more children being sent to prison for longer periods of time, and that isn't child first. If that goes through and it's passed, then that isn't child first. Another issue is the age of criminal responsibility being set at 10 in England and Wales. I believe in Scotland it's 12.
Yes.
But that's still age 10, age 12, it's still low, and that the age should be increased because that would be in accordance with a rights-based child first approach. So there are so many issues, as Sam said there, to sort of highlight, but also as well in England and Wales, more children than ever are being diverted away from the system, so they're not acquiring those criminal records. Which is progressive, and we need to build on that success. Multi-agency youth offending teams, the practitioners I've spoken to are doing fantastic work with children and young people. They're working hard, whether it's virtually or in person, face to face, to get the right support for them. But unfortunately, funding is a real issue and challenge for youth offending teams, high caseloads, etc. So in terms of the work of youth offending teams, I think youth offending teams in England and Wales need more funding and they need more support from government. Yeah, but those are just some of the things that are on my mind in terms of an answer to that.
Yeah, because that interlinks more broadly with this kind of diversion issue, that, you know, there's lack of resources in kind of the wider youth work sector as well. And I know that there's been so many campaigns going on at the moment to try and, you know, get government to invest in like youth centres and youth community work again. And, you know, that will have a real kind of push on promoting both participatory work, but also, yeah, kind of trying to promote that diversionary principle of the child first model as well. So yeah, I don't know, let's see what happens.
I mean, I think like for the first time, the Youth Justice Board for England and Wales have adopted a child first approach, and the Youth Justice Board for England and Wales are very influential in terms of how the system works and operates. They disseminate research and evidence, monitor the system. So at a high level, the Youth Justice Board are promoting a really evidence-based progressive type of practice. So that's really good, and we need to build on that success. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. Maybe just room for maybe a couple more. Although the current emphasis of the YJB in participation is welcome, do you feel that the current government's lack of prioritisation of the rights of children in conflict with the law across many areas undermines this work?
Oh, sorry, Charlotte, I think you've just asked us that question.
I think I just have. Sorry about that. Yes, I was reading it and I was thinking, hang on a minute. Sorry, buddy. That's, sorry, that's right. So I'll try this one. How do we get the balance right with co-production? For example, asking for children to support, but also managing expectations that not everything the child may suggest may result in the best outcomes for them.
You want to start with this one, Sean?
Okay, yeah. So in terms of that question, I know we alluded to it within the presentation as well about certain aspects of decision-making processes being non-negotiable. Certain aspects of that decision-making process can be non-negotiable. So clearly it's a challenge, because the child might not want something to happen. They might not want to meet with a youth offending team worker, for example, and the youth offending team worker will have to insist that they meet with a professional. Otherwise, it could be non-compliance or breach proceedings, etc. That can be instigated, and that can be a real barrier to it. Promoting children's participation, co-production in a youth justice context where it's mandatory that children attend certain appointments. However, there are always opportunities to negotiate and what we've argued is that relationship-based practices need to be front and centre. Relationship-based practices, and in particular empathy, promoting, demonstrating empathy as well. That there are other examples, like in terms of individual and structural aspects to participation, the structural aspects involving children in policy, designing policies, having participation groups, etc. But then individual one-to-one basis in terms of participation, allowing children as much choice as possible in terms of that process. I think building that positive, constructive relationship and being open and honest about expectations as well can help to alleviate some of these issues, some of these challenges. But I just want to go back to a key point in relation to that question as well, that youth offending services need the resources, they need the funding in order to make these things happen in terms of, overhauling systems and processes and promoting participation groups or peer mentoring projects, etc. Clearly, they need time, investment, resources, and also relatedly, any sort of project or group that's set up, we need to make sure that it's fair and it's transparent, and that all children are having opportunities to take part and participate, particularly underrepresented groups as well. So they need to be proactive in terms of the strategies and approaches to make sure that diverse perspectives and voices are included. There are some really good resources at the end. We've put the link at the end of the PowerPoint, and obviously we'll share the resources with you. There's a link at the end, and also Sam and I were talking earlier, HMIP have some good resources as well that practitioners and others may want to tap into in relation to participation work.
Yeah, and I was just thinking when you were talking there, Sean, about managing expectations, and I think it just reminded me of an example of a scenario that was explained to us in someone's practice, where a child was able to lead their own high risk meeting, and they were able, because they were given the space to be able to express what that risk notion meant to them and how they understood it in terms of different parts of the issues going on in their personal life. And I think the fact that they were given that space to have a voice and to be the leader within that meeting, gave everybody within that meeting a very much deeper understanding of that child's life experience, and also how they've managed to reflect on it. And it's building, and it's just an example of how that empathy can be built. And I think, expectations are fluid, aren't they? And negotiation is fluid and dynamic. And I think that's what we have to understand when we're building those relationships and trying to maximise the voice of the child within those participatory spaces. So yeah, I think that what do we mean when we're talking about managing expectations, and whose expectations are we holding ourselves to? Are they ours or are they the child's? And I think, when there is a bit of conflict there, I think that's where, like we've always said throughout the webinar, that the relationship is the most important thing. And I think once that's built and there's this trust and there's this reciprocity and there's this feeling of a partnership, then managing those expectations, we argue, would be a lot easier.
Definitely, and also just to add to that, I know within the question it was asked about research projects. So I know Samantha mentioned this before, but Hannah Smithson and Paul Gray are doing and have done very creative participatory research with children and young people, utilising creative methods. And also as well, the recent project on the impact of COVID-19 on the youth justice system. So AYJ, it's a partnership between organisations like AYJ and the Hannah Smithson and her team as well. With regard to the Peer Power project and how that research was done, the methodology and the methods, the approach that we took, it was participative, it was inclusive, it was all done virtually. So we used Zoom and we used Menti, I think it's called, isn't it, Sam, that we used? So it was very interactive and engaging. Because that's really important when doing any type of research, that it's that the data that you get, your results are valid and reliable because you can trust those results and they are credible, and you get that through mixed methods, but through participative, creative sorts of approaches. So those documents, I think, will be useful for anyone that's interested in doing research projects with children and young people.
Yeah, I just also, I'm just going to divert us all a little bit back to the beginning of the Q&A session, because I was just scrolling through some of the comments, and I know that Anne-Marie, thank you so much for commenting, Anne-Marie, to give Kathy an answer to whether children have been involved in the design of the secure school. Peer Power apparently have been involved in it, and this does not surprise me because Peer Power is such an incredible organisation with the most fantastic ethos and the way that they work with children and young people who've got lived experience of the care and justice system. So yeah, Kathy, you might want to connect with Anne-Marie and find out more from her for that. And so, yeah, I'm just kind of wanting to connect you guys together so you can get more information. Sorry, Charlotte, I'll let you
No, I'm sorry, I don't want to be interrupting. I'm just very kind of aware of time, and I think this is something we could talk about all afternoon. Very interesting, but thank you so much. If you have questions that I'm afraid we didn't get to answer, if you want to send them to cycj@strath.ac.uk, the details will be in the post-event email. Please send them through and I'll make sure that Samantha and Sean receive them. So thank you very much again for your time. I think that was a fantastic webinar, and we hope that you'll come and join us again to talk about participation and where we are perhaps next year. Just while I'm here, and I realise that we are past the allotted time, so I'll try and be quick. I just want to give a little push to our own participation work now that we're all fired up about participation. Obviously, it's a big part of what we do at CYCJ. We've just welcomed a new participation worker, Julia Swan, and Julia is going to be working, leading on developing opportunities for children aged 12 to 16 to participate in policy and practice developments, and also to influence change in youth justice system. And to do this, she's creating a network of interested organisations who are going to collaborate on these projects. So if that's something that's of interest to you, please do get in touch with her. I think Holly is going to be putting some details in the chat, but I will also share all email addresses in the post-event email. And I'd also like to just do a little plug for our brilliant participative project, Youth Justice Voices. If you haven't yet heard of them, and you really should have done, Youth Justice Voices is a joint collaboration between ourselves at CYCJ and a Scottish Through Care and Aftercare Forum staff, and we're funded by Life Changes Trust. And it aims to share and amplify the voices of young people aged 16 to 25 who have lived experience of the youth justice and the care systems. And we use a lot of creative ways to do this to enable young people to explore and share their experiences with policymakers, managers, corporate parents, Scottish Government and everybody. They've only been in existence for 2 years and they're just doing incredible things. So again, the details will be shared there. So please do get in touch if you think that's something you'd like to find out more. We're also supporting STAR, which is Scotland's only curated space for secure care experienced people of all ages, so from children to adults. They're a small group, but they're very keen to develop. They've got a page online, CYCJ, and they've got a Twitter account now. So again, please get in touch if you think you could help them, to support them, or if you know somebody who might be interested. I think that covers everything. Again, I'll be sending out all these details in an email, and we'll be sharing event resources, including recording online. So thank you for joining us, and look out for more details of webinars in 2022.